A woman experienced a bizarre incident while cooking. The eggs she had just bought from the supermarket turned out to be hollow, one after another. At first, she thought only one was bad, but when she picked up another and squeezed it, it instantly crumbled to powder. After checking the entire carton, she was shocked to realize that all the eggs had the same issue. But the strangeness didn't end there. In the afternoon, while she was intently cleaning the windows, she failed to notice the wall behind her gradually closing in, inch by inch. Within seconds, she was trapped, unable to move. Just as she was about to be crushed, the wall miraculously retreated to its original position. Initially, she attributed it to hallucinations from exhaustion and didn't think much of it. However, when she prepared to continue cleaning the windows, she discovered clear indentations on the wall where she had been pressed. At that moment, it dawned on her that everything that had just transpired was real. As she stood there, shocked and terrified, a memory from move-in day suddenly flashed through her mind. All the neighbors had come to warmly welcome her with a party. Everyone wore sincere smiles, except for one woman who seemed nervous and fidgety.
Why are we here? We shouldn't be here.
At the time, no one could understand what she was saying, and they simply assumed that the woman named Margaret had mental issues. After all, this was known as the happiest community in the world, meticulously created by the man standing before them, Frank. Whenever a new resident moved in, he would generously gift them a luxurious villa and a top-of-the-line car. The men could even secure high-paying jobs with million-dollar salaries. However, there were two conditions for living here. First, residents had to be couples or married. Second, they were strictly forbidden from entering the desert to the north, or else face the consequences. Life in the community was vibrant and fulfilling. Every morning after breakfast, the wives would gather at their doorsteps to see their husbands off to work. In this place, women didn't have to worry about making a living all year round. They only needed to spend a little time each day cleaning the house, and the rest of their days could be leisurely enjoyed in this near paradise. Although the community wasn't large, it had complete facilities and a wide array of entertainment options. Even drinks and snacks were provided for free. The most enticing part was the ridiculously low prices of luxury goods, allowing the women to shop without restraint. The only requirement was to attend 2 figure-shaping classes at the boss's wife's yoga studio before sunset to maintain the perfect physique to please their husbands when they returned from work. However, among these women, Margaret stood out as noticeably different. A month ago, she had privately violated the rules and ventured into the northern desert with her son. By the time security discovered her, the child had gone missing, leaving behind only his favorite toy. From that day on, Margaret seemed like a changed person. She told everyone she encountered that everything in the community was a scam and constantly urged them to escape. But no one believed her, secretly speculating that she had lost her mind from the grief of losing her child. Yet the strange occurrences in recent days made Alice start to suspect that things weren't so simple. That afternoon, while collecting laundry on the balcony, she happened to see Margaret holding her son's toy, staring blankly at the distant desert. This scene piqued Alice's strong curiosity, and she decided to venture to the northern area alone to investigate, keeping it a secret from her husband. Oddly, before even reaching the destination, passengers got off the bus one by one until only she and the driver remained. As the vehicle approached the edge of the desert, a violent roar suddenly echoed from the sky. Looking up, she saw a smoke-billowing plane plummeting from the clouds, its shape identical to the model in Margaret's hands. The plane crashed behind the mountain, its flames soaring into the sky. Alice was utterly terrified by the sight before her. She hurriedly asked the driver to stop, wanting to rush over and help. However, the driver's face turned pale as he gripped the steering wheel tightly. He said that area was restricted, and no one was allowed near, urging her not to invite trouble. Seeing the driver's lack of response, Alice didn't bother arguing further. Saving lives was the top priority. She grabbed her bag, jumped out of the car, and frantically ran toward the crashed plane, failing to notice the danger ahead warning sign nearby. Strangely, despite the plane supposedly being nearby, she couldn't see a trace of the wreckage. The further she walked, the more desolate the surroundings became. Before she knew it, Alice arrived at the foot of a small mountain with a conspicuously circular building perched on top. She speculated that this might be where the men went to work every day and decided to climb up and seek help. However, upon arduously reaching the summit, she only found a crude, semicircular hut with no one around. This peculiar structure didn't resemble a company at all, leaving her perplexed about what the men actually did here each day. She noticed that the glass in front of her seemed like a door, so she slowly reached out to push it, curious if it would open. The next instant, a red light suddenly flashed, and her consciousness was immediately snatched away as she collapsed to the ground. When she awoke, it was already late, but she had no recollection of how she had gotten home. Noises came from outside, and she saw her husband busily preparing dinner, but he avoided looking directly at her, seemingly hiding something. Alice couldn't help but interrupt him, demanding to know how she had returned. Her husband claimed that when he got home, she was already fast asleep in the room. Seeing her sleeping soundly, he hadn't disturbed her. He had no reason to lie. So Alice recounted everything that had happened during the day to her husband, who reassured her that it was just a nightmare. The next day, as Alice was busy with housework as usual, the home phone suddenly rang. It was Margaret calling.
Hello?
You went out there. You saw it.
Margaret?
They're lying to all of us. No one asks any questions. We can't stay here anymore, Alice.
Although Alice had a vague feeling that something was amiss, she had no evidence. She thought the matter would gradually be forgotten, But during the afternoon yoga class, an unbelievable incident occurred again. To her horror, she discovered that her reflection in the mirror had turned into Margaret, and the other woman seemed to retain Alice's consciousness. The next moment, she desperately slammed her head against the glass as if trying to escape from the mirror. Amidst the shock, Alice couldn't help but cry out. Turning around, she found the people around her staring at her strangely. At the same time, Margaret had vanished. She was nearly driven mad by this hallucination. Without waiting for the class to end, she dashed to Margaret's house, determined to uncover the truth. However, the scene that greeted her at the doorstep left her stunned. Margaret stood on the roof, clutching a dagger. Hearing someone call her name, she slowly turned her head and then, without warning, jumped to her death.
No, don't!
Alice wanted to rush forward to check, but suddenly 2 red-clad security guards appeared out of nowhere and forcibly removed her from the scene. That night, Alice confided her horror to her husband, but he remained unfazed, merely stating that Margaret had climbed too high and accidentally injured herself. A few stitches at the hospital, and she was fine. However, this time, Alice didn't believe anyone. She had witnessed Margaret die right in front of her. She questioned her husband about where he went every day that was so far away, as it seemed none of the other women in the community knew anything about that mysterious company either. Her husband explained that it was a company secret that couldn't be disclosed. He grew increasingly irritated by Alice's persistent questioning. After all, he was about to be promoted with a raise, reaching a career peak, and he worried that his wife's loose talk would cost him his job. The usually loving couple had their first heated argument. Coincidentally, Alice had a nightmare that night. She dreamed of falling into a bottomless sea, her breathing growing more and more difficult until she woke up gasping for air. This dream also gave her some insight. The next morning, she saw her husband off as usual and routinely sealed the food in the fridge with plastic wrap. But something in her mind suddenly snapped, and she began tightly wrapping the plastic around her own head, layer after layer, until breathing became difficult. This near-suffocating sensation filled her with fear. The instinctive will to live prompted her to frantically try to tear off the plastic wrap, but she couldn't find the end no matter what. The thick layers seemed glued on, impossible to rip off. Just as she was about to pass out from lack of oxygen, she finally pried open a small gap with her fingernails. This genuine suffocation convinced her that everything she had experienced in the past few days was real. Noticing his wife's abnormal behavior, her husband invited a doctor over on the weekend for a comprehensive checkup. The doctor immediately spouted a bunch of professional jargon, trying to convince Alice that those so-called abnormalities were all her imagination. But Alice had studied medicine and knew the doctor was talking nonsense. When the doctor reached into his briefcase for a pen, Alice inadvertently caught a glimpse of Margaret's medical record inside. However, it didn't list her as a patient, but as a prisoner. While her husband and the doctor were talking at the door, Alice didn't hesitate to open the doctor's briefcase, intending to peek at Margaret's medical record. However, all the core information had been blacked out. This further solidified her suspicions. A few days later, her husband was successfully promoted. To celebrate, Frank specially hosted a party. Alice got all dressed up to attend the gala, but at this joyous moment, she couldn't muster any happiness. She couldn't even stand the lively atmosphere and quietly slipped into the restroom. A friend noticed her unusual behavior and hurried over to inquire about the situation. Under questioning, Alice finally broke down and revealed all her speculations to her friend. She suspected that Margaret had been secretly killed because she knew some unspeakable secrets about the community. To prove her point, she dragged her friend to the northern desert again. But her friend didn't believe her at all, even saying that she had gone crazy like Margaret. With that, the friend stormed off in a huff. At that time, Alice was unaware that her friend was actually an informant Frank had planted by her side. The next day, after the men got off work, her husband invited colleagues and neighbors over. Just as everyone was immersed in laughter and blessings, the boss, Frank, quietly slipped into the kitchen and made a beeline for Alice. At that moment, she realized her real trouble had just begun.